Fallacies are fake or deceptive arguments that prove nothing. Fallacies often seem superficially sound, and they far too often retain immense persuasive power even after being clearly exposed as false. Fallacies are not always deliberate, but a good scholar's purpose is to always identify and unmask fallacies in arguments. First, we're going to look at fallacies of ethos. How do you destroy your own credibility, or how can you critique others' credibility when they're making arguments? First, let's take a look at false authority and testimonial fallacy. These fallacies ask, are we really using the best experts to support our argument? An example of false authority would be this infamous ad back when Mike Huckabee was running for office. He had Chuck Norris in his campaign ads, and it would always say Chuck Norris approved. If you don't know Chuck Norris, he was a martial arts star back in the 70s, but he should probably stick to selling exercise equipment now rather than campaigning for presidential candidates. Here's an ad that was meant to raise breast cancer awareness, and it's a famous author. He wrote Crazy Rich Asians, and he's maybe very good looking, but whether he should actually be in charge of checking for breast cancer or giving people advice on how to check for breast cancer, that would be an example of a fallacy. Now, how do we use ethos appropriately when in this area? You want to find an expert who actually has a relationship to the content. So here's an article from the Washington Post that came out today about EpiPens and their failures to investigate product flaws, which caused some people to die. And within the article, the journalist quoted Michael Carome, who was director of the health research group at Public Citizen, a watchdog focused in part on drug safety. This is an appropriate use of ethos. They're asking someone who does have expertise that is related to the contents of the article. Next, we're going to look at the fallacies that attack the person's character or reputation rather than the argument itself. These would be ad hominem, which is attacking the person making the argument; poisoning the well, which is when you try to undermine an opponent's credibility before he or she gets a chance to speak; name calling, labeling an opponent with words that have negative connotations in an effort to undermine the opponent's credibility; and guilt by association, linking the person making an argument to an unpopular person or group. Here is an example of an ad hominem attack where the person is saying, I hate hipsters. They're just calling someone a name. So ad hominem and name calling are very much the same kind of thing. They're pretty much used interchangeably. Back in the 1980s, the company that makes Pace brand picante sauce ran a series of ads designed to poison the well. In them, a group of stereotypical Texas cowboys hassle and even hint at killing their cook for suggesting they eat picante sauce made in New Jersey or New York City. Pace sauces, the cowboys said, were made in San Antonio by people who know what picante sauce is supposed to taste like. The message: people in the Northeast cannot possibly know what makes for good picante sauce, and therefore you shouldn't even try it. Poisoning the well. Don't even try the picante sauce because it's not made in Texas. Guilt by association is when you try to align someone with a very negative image, and it doesn't get much worse than Hitler. So whenever someone is aligning a politician with Hitler, you need to really think about whether the similarities are true or if people are just immediately going to the worst possible candidate that they can go to, which is always Hitler. The final one I have here is an example of a comment thread on the internet. And if you ever want to see tons of fallacies, just go to any news articles and read the comments from the internet citizens. In this one, someone says, maybe the Dems will start realizing what his base already knows. Trump is neither Democrat or Republican. He fights with the Democratic leadership as much as with the Republican leadership. That is why we elected him. Enough of this partisan politics nonsense. So that is the message that this person posted in relation to a Washington Post article about President Trump. But then if we look at the commentary that follows it, first person says, yup. But then the second person says, you didn't elect him. That was Comey and the Russians. Right away, we might think, that might not be the best response to the original comment. And then if we go farther down, you should go back and do your homework. That's just a smack at the person who made the comment. And then the final comment says, a few thousand, they got hoodwinked just like you, cons. So that's an attack on the person, saying you got hoodwinked, you don't know what you're talking about, you're being stupid. All those are fallacies and not actual arguments. The final category is plain folk or transfer fallacy. Are we associating our side with popular or respected images and people or the common man? And the arguers are implying that they or their supporters are trustworthy because they are common people rather than members of the elite. With the transfer fallacy, the person is associating the argument with someone or something that is popular, hoping that the positive associations will rub off, transfer onto the argument. And the plain folk is when they're trying to go at that common man kind of thing. And it becomes a fallacy when it's not true, if there's something false about it. So, for example, here we have a billboard for a gun, and it's for actually a gun store, which you may have opinions for or against gun control, but the idea that baseball and apple pie, they are very American, but that baseball and apple pie are therefore good and therefore guns are good, that's where we get into the fallacy. That's not a very strong logical argument. We also see politicians a lot who indulge in this fallacy. There's a saying among the political campaign world, politicians should not wear hats. And politicians tend to wear hats to try to say, see, I'm just like you. Here's an image of Michael Dukakis, who ran for president back in 1988, and his campaign was pretty much destroyed by this. He tried to show that he was tough, that he was part of the military as a Democrat, that he wasn't soft on military by riding around in a tank and wearing this hat, but he looked so ridiculous and so out of place that it destroyed any credibility he had. Now, there are good ways to use associations. A very good example is when you are an alumni. If you are an alum of Radford University and you apply for a job and you know that someone there works for Radford University, then you probably want to highlight that experience because that person probably already has a positive idea of Radford University and it can be transferred onto you. So that's not a transfer fallacy. That's a good argument. It's when there's something false or not quite authentic, that's when it becomes a fallacy. So just to remember for yourself, when you want to establish your credibility, you can do so by using reliable sources and citing them properly. So that make sure that when you are making an argument, you state the opposition correctly. You can do so by establishing common ground with your audience. You can discuss why you are interested in a topic. You can organize your argument so it's easy to follow. And always proofread. Typos and misspellings diminish your credibility and ethos.